I'm not a complicated man. I like cinema.
Spent that whole summer with me in my room watching movies every day.
I love the movies.
I love the movies.
I love the movies.
Welcome
To the house.
Of 1,000 movies.
2001: A Space Odyssey is seriously such a what a trippy movie. Honestly, what a dream of a movie. The whole movie is just like a dream, and I had so much fun watching this thing in 70 millimeter recently that I just knew I had to do an episode about it. So, welcome back to House of 1,000 Movies. I'm your host Jeff Rossio, and as you can tell, today we're covering 2001: A Space Odyssey, and today is going to be one of those episodes that I do by myself because honestly, I have a ton of thoughts on this movie. Um, I have a bit of a personal connection to it in a way that I'll talk about, like weirdly, not weird, but I have a personal connection to like the movie poster, which is interesting. We'll cover all of that. But I just want to really give my thoughts, and also, as the episode title suggests, give a little bit of defense of my friend Hal, who by the end of the movie I was feeling very, very badly for. And in this current state of the world we're in with AI and chatbots and kind of this like we're moving towards the world of HAL if we're not already there. I thought it was really interesting the way that it was all approached in 2001, and the way that AI was looked at and treated. And I think that I'm definitely not somebody who's like super pro AI, take over the world, leave everything to AI. But I started to feel bad for the poor guy or thing, or I don't really know what to call it. So we'll talk about all that in this episode. But first, I want to give you my quick experiences with 2001. So 2001: A Space Odyssey is a film that I did not see until I was much older, and honestly I don't think I'd really watched the whole way through until the 4K Blu-ray release came out, and I was doing a review for that disc, which is a great 4K disc, one of the greatest that's ever been made. The transfer is unbelievable. If you have a home theater, 2001 is a must own on 4K. And I was watching it, but I was watching it for review, so I'm really looking at some of like the visual quality and listening to the audio and like taking a much more technical approach to it. And so, I honestly, even though I watched it, I don't feel like I truly watched it until a couple weeks ago when I saw it for the first time in a movie theater in 70 millimeter. And I went to the Somerville Theater, which is in Somerville, Massachusetts. It's right outside of Boston. It's like 10 minutes outside of Boston. And they have this great 100-year-old plus theater where they do a film festival every year that I've gone to for many years. They do a lot of first run movies, a lot of screenings, a lot of cool events. It's a beautiful old theater. I love going there, even though it is about 45 minutes from my house. It's well worth it. Great area. And they had a 70 millimeter film festival in 2001, was one of the films that was playing. And they own their own 70 millimeter print, which, the guy who introduced the movie told us about. Like, they bought a while back when it was still very expensive, but definitely cheaper than it probably would be now to buy one of these. And that print is theirs. They own it. It's only been shown in their theater. So it was a really unique experience where it wasn't like when they showed 2001 in 70 millimeter with like the Christopher Nolan restoration that they played in IMAX theaters, which was all like digitally remastered and everything, which looks great. But this was truly a real 70 millimeter film reel. And it was authentic, and it had scratches and dirt and bumps and bruises on it like a film reel should. But it was incredibly authentic. It still looked amazing. And the sound was off the charts good. I mean, I couldn't believe how great it sounded for a movie that's, what are we coming up on, 60 years old, 1968. So it'll come up on its 60th anniversary in a few years. We're on, I guess, 55 was 2023. And it was great to see it there because I had always wanted to see it in a movie theater. And I've always been told like that's the way to truly see it. Again, the guy who introduced the movie said the same thing. Like, if you've never seen this in a theater with a crowd, big screen, unlimited speakers, how many speakers they had, it was crazy. Like, that's the way to view this movie. And it was kind of cool because I know about that theater because I have an aunt and uncle. Well, my mom's whole family is from Medford, Mass, which is right next to Somerville. and my aunt and uncle still live there right on the Somerville line, and I've been going to the film festival with them since I was in college for the last 10 years, when I could make it, 10, 12 years at this point. I think my first film festival was 2012, and they introduced me to that theater, and honestly introduced me to like a lot of independent and lesser known stuff. Definitely one of my biggest influences in like my film journey, along with my own parents and my dad and the movies that we watched. They kind of introduced me to a different spectrum of films, and these independent films, foreign films, some lesser known stuff. While my dad was definitely more into like the big blockbusters and more of the mainstream stuff, and we watched a lot of really cool action thrillers, things like that. So, and I always, I spent a lot of time with this uncle and my aunt, and he's my godfather. I'm not super religious, and neither is he, so we kind of joke about it, but he's my godfather. We spend a lot of time. We're very close, and he always had a poster of 2001 A Space Odyssey in his house, which, like, as a kid I was looking at it and going like, what is this movie? Like, I knew Star Wars, but he always had that poster, like an original poster, right in his like kitchen hallway. And I always looked at it and went, this movie looks fantastic. Like, it looks super cool. It was the old poster, and it had like the big circular spaceship and the space station that was circling the earth, and I just thought it looked incredible, but I'd never seen it. And I knew he was a fan um, of that movie, obviously a big fan of Star Wars, a lot of things that were influenced by 2001. And so it was really cool to like go to the theater that he kind of introduced me to, watch the movie there. I had invited him to come. He was up to something else that day in Boston, but he had seen it before there and told me it's incredible, and it really was. It's really a great experience. So if you ever get the chance to see a 70 millimeter film reel of 2001, I highly, highly recommend it. It's a must see bucket list type thing for a film fan. And so this time, watching it, it was just me and my wife, and we like, I really got to watch it this time. Like, I wasn't viewing this now for technical quality and reviewing the transfer or anything like that. Like, I got to sit down and experience it in a theater and really pay attention. And, one of the first things, just starting from the beginning of the film, that struck me is how like cinematic the whole thing is. Like, and they do this on the disc too, which is really cool. But like, there's the introductory like orchestral music, and they play that in the theater, and the screen's black, and you kind of get introduced, and it's very like old Hollywood, even though this movie's 1968. Where it had that introductory music, it had an intermission, and they gave us an intermission in the theater. People go out, get snacks, then watch the second half of the movie. It had a real event type of feel to it that movies nowadays feel a little bit more disposable. I've talked about this. They're a little bit quicker, easier to digest, very simple. There's no intermissions, there's no big, intro score like that. Like, the closest thing recently that had anything like that is probably the Hateful Eight in their like roadshow version of that, when that came out. And that's because Tarantino obviously loves that kind of old Hollywood and that classic um, exhibition of film. But it was really cool. And then right off the start, it's actually incredible when you look at the opening scene with all the monkeys and like the early humans, how realistic that looks. Like, Planet of the Apes had come out the year before, and Planet of the Apes, admittedly, is a bit campier. It's supposed to be a little bit goofier, but you know, those ape suits are nowhere near what they got in 2001. I mean, those look so realistic even today in 2024. Those would hold up, and whoever was in those suits and doing the acting, like Andy Serkis, would be proud. It was so well done, very realistic, very authentic, and there's a scene there which I need to look up and see how they did this, but at one point, before they've discovered weapons and being able to turn bones into things, and discovered all this technology from the monolith, like, they are just kind of hanging out as early human primates, and a cheetah jumps off a cliff and jumps onto one of the monkeys, and like, definitely is real. I think it's real. I mean, that cheetah attacks that, and I'm like, that's a guy in that suit, and the guy's fighting back, and I'm like, knowing Stanley Kubrick, I mean, what are the chances that that's actually real? Like, I feel like that would be real. Like, I feel like he got a cheetah and was like, all right, we're gonna, just have this thing attack you. Sorry, stunt man, whoever was in the suit. We'll reinforce this thing, but you're gonna get attacked by a cheetah. Then we'll have the handler come and grab it. Like, I don't know how they would have done that unless it was real. It just speaks to the insanity of Kubrick. But everything about that was it looks so good. Like you could put that in a movie in 2024 and people be like, that's pretty decent. Like it's not CGI like the new Planet of the Apes movies, which in their own right are very impressive technology with all the motion capture. But the way that practical effects, the way that all looked, those were great monkey suits. Whoever made those could have been making like fake Bigfoots and tricking people in the 60s. And it looked very, very real. And I do love that whole sequence. It's a little bit slow, but it is really cool that, there's kind of this timeline of, and this is a theory that a lot of people have, that like there's this timeline of some alien being dropped this technology and put it in front of this group and said, we choose you. Now you're going to learn fire, you're going to learn weapons, you're going to learn to defend yourselves. But also immediately, what's the first thing that the monkeys learn is violence. They pick up a bone, it's a weapon. They attack the tribe that had kind of pushed them out of their watering hole, and they beat a monkey to death. And it's like, it's such a commentary on humanity, and like this being, which, we don't know the intentions of this being. And Stanley Kubrick talked about, like, I didn't want to give a face or any kind of design to what these aliens are who are interacting with us. It's just kind of beyond our consciousness. It's, they're spiritual in a way. They're above and beyond what we can comprehend, so they become just an invisible force throughout the movie. But they give us this technology. We don't know the intentions, but immediately, what does, maybe if they'd given it to a different group of monkeys or early primates, like it would have turned out differently. But this group went right to weapons and picked up a bone and beat an enemy to death. And it's like, wow, if that doesn't speak to what humanity does with technology, like it's a great display of like literally every piece of technology we've ever developed was either developed first for military and then adopted by consumers, like GPS, which is a military tool that then we got access to, or it's the flip side where a scientist discovers something amazing and we immediately start thinking about how we can turn that into a weapon. It's just like that's humanity. Humanity is war and conflict and aggression, and we're territorial and we fight, and we're one of the few creatures that actually like kills each other for sport. I heard this in a show or a movie the other day. It was like humans and one other type of animal that doesn't just kill for food or sustenance. It's just sport killing and like territorial killing. Like we just, humans kill each other, and not many other creatures do that without a reason. And our reason is just like, we want more money, or we want more territory, or we want this resource that you have. It's like kind of a crazy concept that we developed that way as humanity. And hey, maybe it comes back to some alien force that was influencing us. And it's all, you can get into with 2001, you start really thinking like those, Reddit would call it like shower thoughts, or like those really deep psychological thoughts of like, we're going to get, take our DMT here for a second and get really spiritual and crazy. But like, was this all set up? Are we an experiment? Are we in a simulation? Is some other higher being watching us and watching how we develop to understand like how not to do things so that we don't destroy themselves? Or are they waiting to see how long until we destroy ourselves? It's like an experiment, this little test that some higher thing is running. It starts to open up all of those questions. And 2001, I think, does that probably purposely, with just kind of this introduction of this square block of technology that it has no real power, but it also has all the power in the world. It's not powered by anything. There's no being there. It's a very interesting take. And then from there, right, we transition, one of the great transitions in movie history, from the bone in the air and flying to the spaceship. And we have this kind of, I would say, very optimistic view of what 2001 was going to be. In fact, 2001 itself was a pretty shitty year. If I think back to truly, when I think back in my lifetime, when did the world change for what I think has been for the worse It's September 11th, 2001. The world changed. Nothing's been the same since. Prior to that, the 90s were great. The 80s and the 90s were great. They weren't perfect, but people, it was just a time that I look back at as being much more positive. And then 2001 hits, literally, prophetic, I guess, by Kubrick to pick 2001. But 2001 seems to be a turning point in history, and everything kind of changed after that, especially in the United States in particular. Everything changed after that. We became a much different place. And that's just interesting that he picked that year, because his view of 2001 is we've got space travel and we've got airports floating around in space, and we've got travel to the moon and moon bases, and we've got long-term, technology that allows you to take trips to, very distant planets and travel across the solar system. And we've got hypersleep and, all this stuff that, yeah, other movies have since adopted and talked about, but like haven't become a reality. And seriously, I think if you're in 1968 and you're watching this, given that the next year, so you watch 2001, it's 1968. The next year they land on the moon. They have a couple more Apollo missions, which have varying degrees of success, but we're on the moon in 1969. And now it's 2024, and we've made no further progress that way. Like, yeah, we sent a rover to Mars, but like I'm pretty sure people thought we'd be standing on Mars by this point. They definitely thought we'd have moon bases. I was talking to my uncle about this movie because we caught up the other day, and he was asking about this experience, and he was like, as a kid I was watching this in the 70s, and like I was fully convinced that in my childhood, like I was going to travel to the moon. Like that was just going to be an option. It was going to be as commercial as flying American Airlines. Like you were just going to get on a plane and go to the moon, and it just never happened. And there's an interesting show, For All Mankind, which I really need to watch, but we also talked about, because if you like that history of what could have been if we continued down that path of technology and exploration, which I think people thought we were going to, it could have been a much different, more advanced world than what we're currently in. And it's funny because even in 2001, some of the tech that they have in that, like the AI HAL, that's not something we had in 2001. IBM didn't even develop something close to that until a few years later, and we're still nowhere near something that advanced. It's funny because at one point the guys in the ship have like literally iPads in their hands. We have all these anti gravity tools, and the technology on the planes too. I was saying, like, it was such an optimistic outlook for the future because the planes looked comfortable, and that was luxury travel. And instead of focusing purely on profits, like if you were going to fly people to the moon in 2024 and do a commercial trip to the moon, they'd probably try to cram 1,000 people into the tightest seats possible with no entertainment, probably very little service. Like you wouldn't be getting food on that trip. It would, I don't know. I guess you'd have to have food because it's a long trip, but like it wouldn't be the experience you see in 2001. And that's because we've just become overrun by profit and capitalism and corporations, I think, versus comfort and luxury and what the advancements in technology could have given us, instead of been used to just make companies more money instead of actually benefit people. And it's such an optimistic outlook on the future, which makes me a little bit sad because I look at it and I'm like, the technology isn't super complicated. They've got iPads and they're doing video phone calls and, essentially FaceTiming and, talking back with family from the moon and like stuff you could totally do now. But it was just, even my wife said like the furniture even looked more comfortable. Like everything just looked more comfortable versus so industrial and so gray and cold, and just let's put the cheapest seats we can in the airport just to make sure we can cram as many people in here as we can. Like there's just all those comforts of the 60s that I think people thought would continue with like air travel and hotels and dining and lounge. It none of that happened. So it's really interesting to look at 2001 because it is so optimistic. And I kind of look at it and I go, I would trade some of this technology that we do have to go to a bit of a simpler technology type world like that. Like they had, in that world, you can assume they had some sort of like internet, and they had like this voice calling and satellite calling and stuff like that, which was in development even then. But man, I'd go back there to be a little bit more comfortable when I'm traveling, or just a little bit more comfortable in general. Um, but the thing about that is also, we don't know the characters in 2001, who honestly is interesting about the characters, because the cast is not like a super well known cast. There isn't a name in that cast I think a lot of people would pull out after watching that movie. There are, some actors in there who did a lot of TV, did some decent movies, but there's no like Leonardo DiCaprio, there's no Tom Cruise, there's no Jack Nicholson like in The Shining. There's just not that like real big pull. They feel like very average, kind of everyman characters. But in 2001, we really only see like the higher end of society. It's like the military, very high end classified stuff. We see these high end doctors and scientists. And when they're in the like moon, or in the space kind of airport, that like Hilton kind of like airport terminal, while they're waiting to fly off to the moon, you don't really see anybody else. The only people that are there are the scientists that he meets with, that are very much on the same level as him, very famous scientists. So I'm sure are paid a lot to go on these missions. And that's really it. You don't see just people walking around with suitcases. And so it's kind of like, I was thinking about it that way, and like, yeah, it's a positive outlook on the future, but it was a bit classist. And it definitely, I think Kubrick's painting this as like, yeah, in 2001 we may have this option, but I don't think a lot of people are going to be able to afford it. I don't think a lot of people will take advantage of it. I think most people are staying down on Earth, and this is a very elitist, classist thing, that only the tops of the tops can get to the moon, and only the top of the top are taking those moon missions. And so then it all starts to make a little bit more sense why that stuff is set up to be so luxurious. So there's some great scenes there. It's a really interesting look at like that. I love looking back at what people thought technology would be in the 50s, 60s, flying cars and all this stuff that we don't have now. We still don't have. And this was supposed to be 2001. So that kind of opening scene there in the terminal, in the airport, on the plane, very cool. Amazing camera work to get those zero gravity shots, and follow the flight attendants around, and just such a cool use of technology. And the models that they used for all those ships and some of the exterior shots were great. But then we get to the moon, and this is where the sound blew me away. Um, I literally thought in the theater, so they get to the moon base, they have a little quick meeting on what's going on here. We're going to continue this kind of false theory and telling people there's, an issue at the base with, I think it was like pandemic, like virus was going through the base that they were working through. And they go down to the monolith that they've discovered on the moon. And it's this interesting kind of progression. Like, the first monolith was on Earth and dropped right in front of these monkeys who knew nothing, had no technology. Now, thousands of years later, we're up on the moon. Humans have finally progressed that far, and you're on the moon, and you found the second monolith. It's almost like they're leaving breadcrumbs, this higher being. And so they find this monolith, they dig it up, and the crew goes down there. And then one of the most horrifying sounds in movie history comes out of that monolith when they all gather around it. And in 70 millimeter, in that movie theater, people had to cover their ears. The guy in the theater actually said, he's like, if you're pregnant, this sound will make you have a baby. If you're not pregnant, it might still make you have a baby. It's going to run right through your body. And it did. That screech, that just awful sound. I think people in there, I thought the fire alarms were going off for a second, because it's nowhere near what you experience watching this at home when you've got it in a big theater. I mean, it was ear splittingly loud, just goes right through your head, cuts through you like a knife. And boy, that I've seen Interstellar in IMAX, very loud movie. I've seen Civil War recently in IMAX, another very loud movie. I've seen some of the Avengers movies. I've seen some very, very loud, intense movies in IMAX. Nothing touched that. That's one of the loudest sounds I've ever heard in a theater. It truly cuts your brain in half. And I just think that's interesting. It's like this radio signal, right? I guess is how it's explained, is like the monolith is signaling, okay, hey, they've got here, they've reached here, they've touched it. Okay, signal to the beings, this horrible radio signal, this screech, that they've reached this point, and now they're ready to advance maybe to their next point, and we're gonna, somehow spiritually, in a different dimension, however these beings work, we're gonna guide them to that. And we quickly transition from there right into the big expedition. And this is where we meet Hal, and we meet our little, crew of two without the hypersleep. And we get this really like really intense few moments of just like really intimate relationship between human and machine. And you feel it's almost like a horror movie in a way, where these two guys are truly like trapped. You're trapped in space with something that knows more than you, and can hear and see everything you're doing, and can manipulate you, and is probably even smarter than what you think. One of the things why I say, like, in defense of Hal, right, is when I'm watching that, truly, so if Hal's job is to be programmed to make sure that this mission is a success, no matter what, it has to be a success. Hal's going to make sure of that. If Hal determines that these two guys on board and the rest of the crew are going to cause too much interference and create human error and get in the way of this mission, then just the way he's programmed, Hal would say, well, I need to take these humans out and get rid of them and take control of this situation, or the mission will fail and we'll all die, right? The whole mission will fail. Hal will be gone. All the humans will be gone anyway, and they'll learn nothing from this expedition. So his whole goal is, let's make sure that doesn't happen. And if that means we have to remove the human element, well, that's what Hal starts doing, I think, from pretty much the minute we meet them and catch up with them on their mission. You can sense that he's not fully trusting these guys on board. And, then obviously Hal starts to play games. And I love the scene where the two of them go into the little space capsule. And I'll be honest, though, very dumb. Okay, because if right, that this is like the smartest piece of intelligence that's ever been developed. So you go into the space capsule because he can't hear you in there. Okay, and I say he, like, it's kind of a weird thing. It can't hear you. Hal can't hear you, but you don't turn the window away. So you talk in plain, like, why not turn the capsule, or why not go out for a little space ride and take it out and say, hey, we got to go investigate this thing. Like, get out of the room that he's in. Because I don't think it's a stretch. It's a great scene. And this is actually right where the intermission kicks in. If you watch it with an intermission, it's a great scene when you finally realize, oh, Hal can read lips and Hal knows everything they're saying. And so then at that point, if you're Hal, you're on a ship, you need to ensure success, and you've got the two humans on board, that they're conspiring to shut you down, that they're not believing in your abilities. That's going to severely hurt the mission in Hal's eyes. And so from that point forward, which is why it's a great intermission break, Hal's like, I've got to save this mission. These guys have to go. They started it, right? They're conspiring against him first. They said, we don't trust this thing. How do we get rid of it? How can we make sure it doesn't sabotage this mission? When we don't really know that Hal was trying to sabotage the mission yet. We don't know that for sure. But the minute that Hal finds out that their idea is to get rid of him and unplug him and essentially kill him, well, he's going to make sure that doesn't happen. And then the intermission cuts, and it's so cool to cut right there, because that's sort of that horror movie reveal where you're like, oh no, this thing is even smarter than they thought. These guys are in big trouble. And so then you come back. You come back after the intermission, and obviously you're scared for our astronauts here on board. And Hal kind of immediately starts going to work. And this is one of the longest, quietest sequences. And this movie, I will say, like, the movie's very, I mentioned, it's very dreamlike. It's very kind of psychedelic in a way. And it could easily make you fall asleep. Like, I know during the intermission, there were a lot of coffees being sold because it was the middle of the night. I mean, it was like 10 o'clock at that point when the intermission hit. There was a lot of coffee because the movie, it almost puts you into a dream state, and you're overwhelmed by the big theater and all the sound. And like the scene that comes up next could truly just kind of make you doze off, but not in a way that like this movie's boring, just in a way that like, I guess you could almost put this movie on to fall asleep because it will kind of just put you into a trance. And, the next scene where we send one of our guys out, he's going to go fix the thing. And Hal basically shoots him off into space, essentially killing him, suffocating him. Okay, now we know, okay, Hal's up to no good here. But still, remember, just doing his job. And then we got to send our second astronaut out, and there's this drawn out like 15-minute sequence where he's just kind of floating through space, trying to get to try to save his buddy, bring him back, bring him into the hangar. Oh, then he realizes Hal's not going to let him back in. He needs to find a way back in. There's that great exchange. Open the pod bay doors. Hal won't do it. This is where this he's now truly figuring out, okay, he knows what we're up to. He knows our conversation. He understands what happened. How do you apologize to an AI that's programmed to just, basically at this point destroy you because you were trying to destroy it? You can't. You're stuck, rock in a hard place at that point. But it's a very, very long, slow, drawn out, like it's, I guess, intentional in that way. It builds a little bit of the dread of like what's going to happen to this guy as he tries to come back. He's now left the safety of the ship. Will he be allowed back in? So I guess it kind of builds that dread, but it is very, very slow, very, very slow, very Kubrick, very like stylistic. And um it's very intentional that like this is going to be slow and drawn out and just methodical. So I totally get if people don't like that segment, because it's a lot. It's a lot. But it does culminate in that great standoff. And then we get back in, we get sucked into the hatch, and we get back into the ship. And that's a scary moment too, because okay, now you're alone. Your buddy's dead, you're alone. It's you and the AI. And you realize that the AI has killed everybody on board, shut down the life systems. Everybody in hypersleep is dead. So you can't wake anybody up to help you. It's one versus one. That's it. And that to me is one of the scariest moments, and like truly becomes like a horror movie in that time period. Um, and then what becomes more horrific, honestly, is what happens next, because this is where I feel for Hal. Again, Hal's only doing exactly what it's been programmed to do: secure the mission. The humans are getting in the way. So the Hal's system, learns, okay, humans are in the way. Humans will fail this mission. I need to remove the humans to make this mission a success. Okay, human came back in. Now I'm in trouble. Now Hal, this whole scene where the guy goes into, he shuts Hal down, right? That whole scene, Dave is going in, is so sad, because now Hal's is trying to save its life. Now it's begging for its life, or whatever you want to call its life. And that is so sad to me. The whole like Daisy day, like when it starts to regress from, as he's unplugging the different systems, and Hal starts to regress from super intelligent being to, back to like normal AI roots. And it's like, I'm the HAL 9000. It's just like kind of like repeating its, operating system procedures. And then it devolves down into like a child. And, you almost, it feels like you're pulling the plug on a 3-year-old, and it's singing this nursery rhyme that it knows as it drifts off and dies. And that's so, to me, that was, I don't, it's going to be an interesting thing when we get AI that looks and acts and feels human, because Chat GPT and the stuff we have now is nowhere near HAL. We don't have these kind of human acting. It's all just very input output driven right now. It's really not AI. It's not artificial intelligence. It's machine learning. it's generative stuff. It's basically, if we don't give it something, it won't give us anything back. And when we get to that point, the morality of that, like, you're killing an intelligent being. Like, this is an intelligent being. It was created by a creator of technology. It was given a life, a name, a personality. It has a brain in a weird way. It shows emotions. Like, Hal is showing emotions, which is interesting while you're listening to him talk with the crew. Like, you're like, this thing has, there's something to the way it speaks. Like, it has emotions. I think the reporters, when they're doing their segment, actually ask about that. But can you just kill that thing? I don't know. It was like really sad. Hal is a box with a camera and a light on it, but I felt for it probably more than any other character in the movie at any point. Like, that was so real. That was something so above and beyond probably what people could even comprehend at that time period, um, with the way computers were. But we're getting closer to that, and I'm like, man, if you have like this AI humanoid thing that's given life and given a backstory, like, can you just kill it? Like, you just would, like, you wouldn't just kill a person. So can you just kill this thing? I don't know. It's a very interesting, like, morally ambiguous question that, as probably in my lifetime, I don't know, maybe technology won't progress. Again, this is like Kubrick thinking in 1968 what 2001 would be like. And I'm thinking, what's 2050 going to look like? I'm assuming there's going to be like humanoid AIs walking around. But if there are, like, what's the morality and the ethics behind all of that? And shutting something like that down, which is, if it's truly intelligent and has feelings and emotions, and um, you get into a weird, morally ambiguous area. And I think that was really forward thinking of Kubrick to kind of play with that back in 1968, when those conversations are really not happening. So that's such a great scene, truly, and a horrifying scene. Like, I felt like I was listening to like a child slowly pass away, which was horrifying to me, especially as like a dad of young kids. I was like, this is just so sad. This is super, super sad, which is why I come to the defense of Hal, because, again, like a child, like something, even Hal, as smart as it is, doesn't have nuance that a human brain has. It's very childlike in the way that it was given a task and it needs to complete the task, no matter how ridiculous, right? And sometimes, if you have kids, you know this. You tell them to do something, and they do it in the absolute most ridiculous, unsafe, unhinged way. Well, that's all Hal was doing. Hal needed to save the mission and went to the most logical, simple, but unhinged and kind of crazy solution, which was to kill everybody on board. There were probably other ways to go about it, but it's childlike in that way. And so you really were kind of like killing this childlike being. A very, very sad moment. And then, of course, from there, we get the trippiest LSD sequence of the whole film, where we get sucked into the unknown, I guess you'd call it. Um, and that whole thing, again, super, super loud and 70 millimeter, blew your eardrums out. A lot of people covering their ears. I don't blame them. I didn't, because I just wanted to experience it. But I swear, by the end of that sequence, I almost was feeling a little bit uneasy, like sick in a way. Like, heavy bass and really loud sounds can almost make you nauseous. I was feeling that in a weird way during that sequence. I guess it's not weird. I guess it's normal. Um, but what a trip. I mean, boy, I understand why people are like, we're going to take drugs and watch 2001. You get to that sequence, and it reminded me of Interstellar in a lot of ways, where they're kind of going through the black hole, right? I assume Christopher Nolan, given his love for 2001, knew that. Interstellar definitely pulls heavily from a lot of 2001 and some of those themes. And that sequence felt like going through that black hole, where it's just like, we don't know what's in a black hole, but it's just symbols and light and color and stuff that we probably can't comprehend. Our brains aren't big enough to comprehend. We're not developed enough to comprehend it. And so what you see is what you get. It's just this craziness as you get sucked into this different dimension, different, uh, you know, different sense of being, just whatever it was, where Dave's just going through just the wildest Willy Wonka tunnel of just crazy colors and sound that you've ever seen. And I think that, again, was a really forward thinking, like, unique way to kind of visualize how a human might experience something like that without. And there's conversations, if you read about 2001, there's conversations where Kubrick wanted to potentially put aliens in and have like a being that you could connect to, and he didn't. And I think it works better. Just these beings are just light, sound, stuff that what we can comprehend of them is only our basic five senses, and we can't get to this higher level of being wherever they are. I think it's really smart, very forward thinking, definitely something that's been copied by other filmmakers. 2001 is an extremely influential movie, but that scene was a trip. It was so loud. And then the trippiest part is then you get to this like Victorian house, and the way that I took this, thinking back on it, the ending of 2001, is that Dave is basically he's been sucked into this world in this different being, and now he's just kind of being monitored. He's like in a human zoo. It's the kind of way I think that's the way I look at it. He's in a human zoo. He's being monitored, and he's there for the rest of his life. And I don't know if this is just filmmaking or if they truly are like accelerating his life. And he's watching his life literally pass by in front of him, but it's accelerated. They're basically just trying to see like what's the aging process for humans like, and can we have this person ascend to a higher being, and what happens when somebody dies, and it plays with like their soul and like rebirth and all these different themes. That's just the way I look at it. It was like, oh, we've finally got one of these humans that we've developed over thousands of years through this technology that we dropped on their planet and gave to them, and now they're finally here. They're smart enough, they're advanced enough to come to us. We can experiment on one of them and just see like what's gonna happen, and then rebirth them as some higher being, like this, the ending where Dave withers away, dies, and then immediately is kind of like back into the womb and becomes this space baby with some of the creepiest eyes that I've ever seen. That scene really that was super unsettling for me for some reason. That big ass baby, space baby with these like adult eyes just kind of looking down on the earth. And it's kind of like, well, what, I think there's a lot of theories on like what was created here. Did we just like create some god? Do we just, is this some higher being? Is this now like a new alien race that's, he kind of looks a little bit menacingly down on Earth, even though he's a baby, like that's going to come and take over? Okay, humanity is over. We're ascending to the next step here, and it's this thing that these beings created. It's a really interesting, very open ended concept that obviously sparked a ton of discussion over the years and many different theories. But that's the way I kind of took it. Was like, well, you've hit these check marks. The monkeys, monolith, they get the technology, they develop a society that becomes technologically advanced enough through the being's help to get to the moon and get into space. They discover another monolith that again gives them technology to be able to head out into deep space and to head out into another dimension through a wormhole, whatever it ends up being. And now we're ascending to that next level. You've hit the goal. The monolith returns in this kind of weird human Victorian zoo, which I've read is like probably these beings like best interpretation of like what a human household looks like, because it's kind of this weird architectural mess. And the monolith reappears, and it's like, okay, on to the next step. You've progressed. You've hit this checkpoint. Now we're progressing, and you're becoming the higher being, maybe what they are. Maybe that's what's being introduced to Earth and to that solar system. Like, I don't truly know where it goes, but it is a trippy ending. And I love that it's open ended. I love that. I always mention Jaws, but I think about Jaws doesn't show that shark. Kubrick doesn't show the aliens. Some of the things in movies where you don't show and give people the answer. Alex Garland does a really great job with this in some of his sci-fi movies, like Annihilation. The ending of Annihilation really reminds me of the ending of 2001 in a way. The ending of Interstellar and some of that kind of wormhole, secondary dimension type stuff. Like so many films. Contact is another one. So many films been influenced by 2001. And I love that open-ended sci-fi ending, because honestly, it probably meant something different in 1968 to people than it meant in 1998, and it means something different in 2024, and it'll mean something different in 2050. It's that's what's so cool about leaving something open-ended like that. So that's my breakdown. I loved 2001. I had such a great time watching it in 70 millimeter. If you get the chance, please find a 70 millimeter screening, watch it. It's so good. You guys will love it. It's a cinematic bucket list type item. Um, whether you watch the Nolan one or a reel of 70 millimeter reel, whatever you can get your hands on. But what a great film. What a trippy film. What a film that you can talk about for ages and ages. And Kubrick's just a master. And I loved it. The practical effects, the technology. There's no way this movie was made in 1968. And I totally get why people think Kubrick like faked the moon landing with his technology, because how did he make this? Even before they landed on the moon, he made this incredible movie about technology and space that it blows me away that he was able to do it. So such an incredible movie. If you've never seen it, go see it, watch it, get the 4K disc. It's pretty widely available at this point. You'll be able to watch it at home. But yeah, if you can get to a theater and see it, I highly, highly recommend it. So thanks for listening and watching this episode. Hope you guys enjoyed this little deep dive into 2001, my thoughts on it, my little background with it, my experiences and my analysis. If you want more like this, of course, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. If you're listening, it's on all your audio platforms. Just make sure you subscribe and follow so you don't miss a new episode. And if you're on YouTube watching, subscribe to the YouTube channel and get all the latest episodes. Of course, make sure you check out my merch store as well. That'll be linked in the video in podcast descriptions. I have House of 1,000 Movies merch, some other cool film buff, film lover merch in there, so check that out. And of course, just follow me on social media for all the latest: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all the different platforms, all down in the description as well. But I appreciate the support. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. It was a ton of fun for me to talk about and just kind of go deep into 2001. Please watch it if you haven't. Please watch it in 70 millimeter. But hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Stay safe, stay healthy out there, and I'll talk to you all soon. Hey there, movie buff. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of House of 1,000 Movies. I hope you had as much fun listening as I did discussing some of my favorite films. Don't forget, if you're into video podcasts, you can head over to the YouTube channel and hit the subscribe button. If you're already on YouTube, it's right there, so why not hit it? And for our audio listeners, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. If you've been enjoying the show, why not show me some love by leaving a 5-star review? It really helps me out and it lets me know that I'm hitting the mark. And hey, before you go, a quick shout out to our sponsors. By supporting them, you're not just supporting the show, but also the content you love. Thanks again for joining me in the House of 1,000 Movies. Until next time, keep watching, keep listening, and keep watching great movies. Take care, everyone.